What does the final chapter of Little Nightmares 2, The Signal Tower, hide off camera and behind the scenes from the player? In this game, we've endured and survived this twisted, nightmarish universe as we're nearing the conclusion. This game's original state is dark, so you can imagine the things hidden throughout the game, which we never see normally, being outside of our camera's usual view range and out of bounds. So we'll be taking a peek behind the developer curtain to see how the game is put together, like sequence-breaking Nightmare 6, and taking a closer look at the freedom that Mono never gets to experience. So, with that said, I hope you enjoy this breakdown and epic conclusion of Little Nightmares 2, Chapter 5, The Signal Tower. As always, I usually hit you guys with a recap as we go through this, so everyone knows the sequence of events that take place throughout the game. We had just previously finished the Pale City, as we took on the Thin Man and destroyed him in this intense street fight, leading us into the final section of the game that takes place within the Signal Tower. Starting off, we'll run down this oh-so-familiar hall, where we'd expect to see the Thin Man waiting behind this door. However, like I said, he's currently out of the picture, and instead, we'll find ourselves in this trippy dreamscape-like building that has a lot of doors, as random objects can be seen floating about. Approaching this door will end with it shutting on Mono, as this door to the left opens. Walking through the doorway will intensely warp us up above where we just were. Mono is going to get his steps in today, as we make our way up these stairs, warping into a completely different area. This is going to be a repeating theme, as we're going to want to follow the sound of the music that's being played, essentially identifying the correct doorway we must take in order to proceed. I can't help but reflect on how cool this entire sequence is overall, with the aura of it, music, and so on. There are slight obstacles we'll encounter while traversing through these doorways, like this door we'll need to open from one side and run through the other, along with this particular hallway where we need to push down a board before seeking out the doorways in which the music is coming from. In the totality of it all, we'll find ourselves heading up a final set of stairs, which leads us to, well, the source of the music. Let's rewind here though, and take another look at everything we have just gone through. From where we began, if we go ahead and zoom out, we'll see the entirety of what's currently loaded in, with the door and stairs room standing out the most. It's pretty interesting to check out, as we'll also be able to see the next area in which we'll be heading to, once taking that door that opens for us. I did happen to find a random wagon that was floating in place out of bounds, with not much else taking place though. It was very fascinating to get an overall look at this main area, as we can see it goes quite a ways up. Needless to say, it's probably a good thing that Mono is unable to look down while making this climb. That is, of course, if heights is on his list of nightmares. I tried getting Mono onto some of these floating objects within here, but quickly realized that they have no collision. Therefore, nothing for Mono to warp onto. Trying to get onto the lips of these doorways was also a bust, as Mono simply slid right off of them and fell to his death, making for a glorious F in the chat. Looking through the door that leads out of this area, we'll see it actually doesn't lead to anywhere though. This is something we can barely see in normal gameplay, but once approaching the door, if we stand here and go off camera, we can actually find another copy of Mono, which is where we end up going once we walk through the doorway. This is pretty cool to see how it's done. Doing it this way, I would speculate that it allows for a smooth transition that takes place as we go through the warp. I wanted to try and go into the room that shuts as we initially enter this big area though. So I warped in there before the door could shut, and as you can see, we can walk around in here. However, as soon as I tried to leave the room, I hit an invisible barrier, and then the door ended up shutting on me, trapping Mono within. Moving on, we'll come up this first set of stairs, where if we stop at the doorway here, we'll once again see how Mono is technically in two places at once, as the second awaits for the player to walk through. I tried warping over to this hallway where the other Mono was, which ended up having no collision though, as I fell into the void. Oops. We can, however, warp Mono to one of the higher staircases we end up taking, allowing us to essentially skip this entire area. Only wanting to see if it worked, I plunged off the stairs to reset the instance. Pushing forward, we're going to run to a lot more of these instances where we'll see multiples of Mono, as the main area will practically unload while traversing these halls. So I continued on, as we of course have to follow the music, because if we don't, you'll see the game's waiting to warp us back for choosing the wrong path. Progressing, we'll see the main area loads back in, as we continue our exploration for anything that may catch our eye. Unfortunately, this is a very repetitive section as we slowly climb up the stairs. I did decide to give Mono a mushroom power-up at one point, to see how the game would react to Big Boy Mono. You'll see I can't even push down the board here, which is due to my size. However, the game is not a fan of Mono being big as we traverse through the doors. I'm not sure what happened, but while doing this, the game just sort of deleted me as the death music queued up and restarted the instance. It was cool to check out this picture in the hall though, as it's a taste of things to come, being a picture of Six in her monstrous form. With that said, let's carry on with the next section. Speaking of Six and the horrific form she's taken, this is where we'll first encounter her. As you can see, Six isn't doing so hot, being much larger than normal and contorted. Yelling to her will get her to come towards us, as she'll then sit in the middle of the room. This will then allow us to grab the conveniently placed sledgehammer that she was on top of, as we take a big swing at the music box. This ultimately blasts Mono into a dark area where we will temporarily see him sitting, as he'll eventually come to being snapped back into the room where Six is. The room is now falling apart from the blast though, and we need to run. Six will then begin horrifically chasing us, as we'll need to use a door portal to keep ahead of her. Narrowly escaping her, we'll make our way into this next room where, well, she isn't letting up, as she'll make her way in, entering from the background. Frustratingly unable to find us, she'll then exit the room to continue her search for us. After taking the portal doorway, we'll see her pushing forward, as we'll want to avoid following her. So we'll get this axe and break the door, only to find ourselves face to face with her once again though. We're now tasked with having to hit the music box again. Doing this, we'll have to distract her with shouts, as we utilize the door portals. Hitting the music box this time brings us back to this empty dark area, where we were briefly just a little bit ago. Coming to, we'll eventually encounter a door with an axe in it. As you may have guessed, this is where we need to go, as it will bring us back for another round with Six. Doing the same thing as last time, we'll distract her and strike the music box once it's unprotected. Deja vu sets in as we're back here again, where we'll have to find the door with the axe again, which yes, brings us back to Six for round 3. The layout slightly changes, but we basically have to do the same thing to progress. This final strike we make on the music box will follow with Mono eventually coming to, as the room is now in ruins and Six has, well, she's seen better days. Retrieving the axe once again, we'll shout at her to clear the way as we strike the music box. It appears something is working as we do this, given that Six has visibly gotten smaller. One last strike to the box will darken the room though, as we'll eventually see that Six is back to her normal form now. We're about to endure the collapse of this place, but with all that back and forth, let's now go back and see how this all transpires from another perspective. Zooming out, once we first encounter Six, we'll be able to see the layout during this part, with there being a large area above us. We will come back to this area shortly. Coming back down here, we'll be able to see some text that's above our current location. We can see some pictures in the background as well, which are curious and may tell a story in themselves, but I honestly couldn't help creeping myself out as I got a closer look at these dolls that are in here. Gloriously terrifying. However, this text above the room that I mentioned before reads, "Room is now 200 units shorter, but not the warped room. It should be shorter too. But animations needs to be updated on 6 also then." We've seen texts like this before in previous chapters, which are basically instructions left over for other game designers. We normally don't get a good look at Six's face while she's in this monstrous form, so getting a closer look at her, we'll see that she in fact doesn't have a face. It's just a blank slate with a bunch of hair coming out of it. This of course makes sense. Why put the work in to create a face for this model when no one's ever gonna see it? Anyway, getting an overall look at Six, I sort of can't blame her for the decisions she ends up making throughout the rest of this chapter, given the amount of pain she must be enduring. Once we hit the music box for the first time though, a lot takes place here. As the area we came from unloads, we'll see another area loaded in for the next sequence of events, along with another model of Six. This is occurring while we're normally observing the large dark open area. Coming back down to where we initially hit the music box though, we'll find this particular model of Six is all twisted up and knocked out, as she's clipping through the back wall. Normally at this point, we'll warp back to where we'll need to begin running from this other model of Six. If we zoom out and come back to the original Six we encountered though, we'll see that she snaps back to her music box, as she'll then just linger here. Thinking I froze time, it turns out I was actually running the game fairly slowly. So when I came back to check out Mono, well, he got slapped by Six. Real hard. Just look at him go. I guess this is Six's way of getting back at us, seeing as Mono is semi-responsible for her mutation. But I digress. In short, we're actually dealing with 2 Sixes during this entire encounter. At least, that's what I thought. Until I came down here only to discover a third model of Six laying dormant. I want to say this is a model that comes into play when she's chasing us, but I was never able to see that transpire, so I can only speculate. We can also find the music box down here floating on its side as it's visibly playing, which is curious. However, teleporting back down to the initial 6 we encounter shows that she's completely inactive, as I'm able to wander about this room with no real danger. Although, I was more interested to see how the 6 that ends up chasing us reacts when I warp behind her during the chase. Right as I got behind her, you'll see her legs stretch as she pushes on with the chase. She'll progress normally, but once she gets to here, where we normally lose sight of her, we can see her show off her skills in contortion. She'll begin to clip through the wall as she twists within it. This follows with some more stretching of her model, which could explain her constant screams of pain. Joking aside, the model will then quickly slide back through another wall where she'll hold her position. This may not normally occur this way, seeing as we warped behind her during the chase, but I'm not entirely sure. Unaware of where it came from, I found another model of 6 hanging out in this hall we normally run through, so I took back control of Mono to investigate. Getting over here as a player, you can clearly see it's an odd sight, as she'll just remain here until we progress. We can't be harmed either. Jumping into the next room though, you'll see that there's yet again another 6 up ahead, and the one behind us ends up unloading. With that happening, the contorted model back behind the wall will then make her entrance through the background. It's pretty wild to see how all this transpires. Once she's done looking for us though, she'll do this creepy slide through the hall and into the next area, where she'll eventually unload. The other 6 will then activate and start going down the hall and into the doorway, where she'll freeze momentarily as she waits for the player to progress. When she does go into this room though, she'll just freeze into position, where she'll remain alongside a music box. Zooming out, we'll see that the next room is already loaded in, but 6 is not. It's only until we break through this door that she'll load in here, which, if you are wondering, is another model of 6, as the other is still frozen up here. Getting in here though, we'll once again see how there are doubles of Mono to make this illusion with the door work. It's cool to see how this very same technique is used for 6 as well, when she attempts to attack us, reinforcing the optical illusion overall. Before taking out the music box though, if we zoom out, we'll see how the large room up above is loaded back in, where we're about to head to. So I went ahead and struck the music box, and as you can see, Mono will clip through the floor as it breaks, with 6 disappearing shortly after. This then triggers the next 6 encounter to load in right above where we just were. If we come over here though, this is where Mono is warped to. This area is especially interesting to see how it works. You can see how when the player walks about, the level will generate accordingly as they move. Our visibility is normally obstructed by darkness, which in turn creates another optical illusion, leading us to believe we keep running into the same door as we traverse through this area. Grabbing the axe, you'll see that it's synced up with the other axes as they fall out of the door. Even with picking up the axe, you'll see that we also pick up the other ones as well. Overall, having this view makes this section an even more trippy fever dream. However, coming back to 6 and striking your music box again basically transpires the same as it did before. Except this time, the doors in this big area are now floating above the ground. At first, I wasn't entirely sure why this was the case. Speculating though, I believe they did this so the player could walk around a bit longer before ultimately finding the door, as we'll see how they come down once we walk around for a bit. You'll also see how the next area we warp to is now loaded in. The axe we use here can be found right out in front of the area on top of a white box. This item will swap into gameplay as we grab the axe like so, given that it's no longer on the white box once grabbing it. The normal size 6 can also be found laying in here, along with the bigger one laying in the background, within the goop. It's clearly just not 6's day. Hitting the music box in here is interesting though. Slow motion causes it to flail around in a weird manner, but watching the background, we can see how the transition takes place as 6 gets smaller once we hit the box. The smaller model will simply load in, as we'd usually not see this during normal gameplay. The bigger 6 will shrink down a little as it eventually disappears. Taking a closer look at the mid-size 6, we can see that she has her face again. So I can only imagine she feels a little better, right? However, as soon as we hit the music box for the final time, that model will unload as the normal size 6 loads in. Not gonna lie, I lost track of how many 6s we just encountered through this portion, so with that, let's continue on to the next section. So we've just freed 6 from her horrific monstrous state, and now it's time to run. The eye monster, or entity, will begin chasing us. It's nothing confirmed, but to my understanding, this is the signal tower's true form, as it grows by consuming viewers through the transmission. It would explain all the clothes that can be seen as we play through. Anyway, this entity chases us into a big area where there's a long bridge we must cross. Losing our footing, 6 will get ahead of us, as we can see the bridge is crumbling beneath our feet. Leaping towards Six, she'll grab us, as Mono dangles in the air. Unfortunately for Mono, Six decides to let go of us. Watching Mono fall, I was in disbelief during my first playthrough of this. We can see Six will make her escape though as the screen fades to black. Coming to, we'll see that Mono is still alive, but now alone on the surface of this eye monster. Wandering around a bit, we'll eventually find a mound of flesh that has a chair on the peak of it. At this point, it appears that the most obvious thing to do is to sit in the chair. After doing so, we'll be met with this creepy, claustrophobic cutscene, as we're now able to see that Mono is surrounded by this eye entity. The walls of this creature will slowly close in, to the point where it nearly engulfs Mono. Instead, though, we end up in an empty room, but still on the chair. I won't pretend that I know what exactly happened here, but I must say this scene was quite the reveal when first playing through. Mono depressingly sits in the chair over a long period of time. With absolutely no choice, Mono grows up to become none other than the Thin Man, where he'll patiently wait to encounter his young self with Six, essentially being a time loop of some sort. Another scene occurs, where we'll see Six jump out of the TV. A glitching remain of herself will then appear, as it looks over at the piece of paper, which foreshadows Six's adventure that takes place in the first game. It'll then disappear, as Six's stomach gurgles, with the credits rolling shortly after. It's now time to take a final look at everything we just endured. So we'll see when the eye monster is chasing us that we can do the same thing we did with Monstrous 6, as I warp behind it during this chase. Leaving Six to fend for herself, I begin following this flesh wall. However, Six somehow shows up behind me as well. She eventually stops following, as I could only assume it's because we're not supposed to be back here. Coming to a stop, it appeared that I may have soft-locked the game, as there's nothing else loaded in ahead of the eye monster. It didn't last long though, because as soon as I took back control of Mono, I was immediately killed, hence restarting the chase. So I ran through the chase this time, but as soon as I got to the doorway that leads to the bridge area, I decided to break off and pull a fast one on Six. I ended up warping to the other side of the bridge to safety, where I'm in fact able to walk about. However, the progression of the game halts, and if we look over here, we can find that Six is in a T-pose, as she floats in this position indefinitely. Who's getting left behind now, sucker? Time to do exactly what Six did to us, and ditch her, as we leave this nightmare now. Unfortunately, and as you may have guessed, that's not how this works, as we enter this white and blue room for a brief moment, which ends abruptly, as I fall to my death. Unglorious. Trying to warp over here as make the jump doesn't work sadly, so unfortunately, we're going to have to watch Mono get betrayed once again. Truly, a heartbreaking moment for our boy Mono. I lost track of him when he fell through. However, we can watch Six make her escape as she goes into the blue and white room. She'll eventually come to a stop within here, and will freeze in place indefinitely. Coming down here though, we'll find the big flesh area that Mono ends up in, which is where he is at this moment. We can also see next to it is the area in which we observe the whole growing old scene. We will get back to this place in a moment though. This eyeball monster area has similar functions as the door area we encountered before, except the mound of flesh with the chair that we eventually find is actually under the map at this moment. I tried getting Mono down here to see if the game would react in any way, but as you can see, it's difficult to navigate. I did manage to get him in the chair, but nothing occurs when doing this. Walking through this fleshy area, we can see how the walls in the background will get closer as we progress. Eventually the mound with the chair will be transferred from below to the surface of this room. I went back down below to confirm the mound and chair were gone, and found a single eyeball down here just chilling in the void. However, once we get into the chair, we can get a better look at how this whole area consumes the space around Mono, as it closes in slowly but surely. This is when Mono is warped to the room with the chair, which I apologize in advance because the game started lagging a bit here, as I had trouble accessing the camera. After sorting it out, I came back to the monster area where we could find the chair we were initially in all by its lonesome, surrounded by these creepy eyeballs. It's now time to get a better look at Mono's age progression though. Seeing as the game usually fades to black while he grows up, we'll see that the model simply changes in an instant. Getting a closer look, we can see his age hasn't changed much, but clearly he's bigger. We can also find the original Mono stored underneath this area as it plays out, which is the only model that's placed here, as the others vanish once they leave the chair room. You'll see the chair gets bigger as well when Mono does. I have to say though, this particular model of his age progression made me uneasy. He's clearly bigger, but seeing his face, which we normally can't, makes him appear as an old baby man. You can clearly see that he's been through the grinder, and that he's seen some stuff. The next transition is more familiar, as he's becoming older and looking much more like the terrifying Thin Man. I'm curious as to where he found a comb for his hair, or even the clothes, now that I think about it. Perhaps the eye entity is giving him the clothes, which belong to the viewers that it has been consuming. Definitely food for thought. In Frieza fashion, he'll get to his final form, as the room around him gets smaller as well. What a miserable life this must have been. No wonder he wants to destroy Six. Moving on to the last area before the credits, we'll actually find that Mono is here as well. We can see how Six is standing by as her model waits behind the TV. This room wasn't accessible with Mono due to the extreme lag I was experiencing, but I did manage to break the sequence of this whole part though. I tried warping to the chair before triggering it in the eye room, which resulted with the cutscene activating. I was able to move for a brief moment, but eventually lost control as the scene played out. When I tried warping into the room with Six, in short, I died, which caused the game to reset me back to the last checkpoint as the credits rolled. This was my sign that we've reached the end. And with that, we've completed this out of bounds journey through the entirety of Little Nightmares 2. I do hope you all enjoyed this, and I'll see you in my next video real soon. Cheers!